Hi, hello again, my Cosmic family. I'm super excited to have another great interview today. We have here Ryan Sprague, and I'm really excited because this is kind of like a part of my own history that I haven't really shared as much. I think it's just because it's become a little bit more okay now to talk about this, but it hasn't always been okay. So here's a little bit of Ryan's bio. Ryan is the founder and creator of the Clarity with Cannabis course, which is focused on helping as many people as possible break dependency and create a healthy relationship with cannabis without having to quit. The Grow with Cannabis course, which opens up how to grow truly high quality cannabis using organic methodology and biogeometry, and the Conscious Cannabis Collective, which is a mastermind dedicated to help its students learn how to work with the cannabis plant consciously to unlock the psychedelic powers of cannabis for transformation and healing to assist them in ushering in their next level of evolution. What a run on sentence, but great run on sentence.
Guilty as charged.
He has spent over 15 years working intimately within the realms of plant medicine, holistic health, and spirituality, and discovered the hidden powers of cannabis when bringing his father through the end of his life with the support of the cannabis plant. He has since supported over 5,000 people in learning how to work with the cannabis plant, and his mission is to help the world at large tap back into the psychedelic powers of cannabis for personal and spiritual growth through his mastermind, the Conscious Cannabis Collective. Well, thank you, Ryan. I'm super excited for you to be here.
Heck yeah, Charlie, so amazing to be here, man. I mean, we've rocked two shows on my podcast, and when you asked me to come on, I was like, signed, sealed, delivered, bro. Show me where to sign up, and I am there.
Yes, yes, so excited. So Ryan and I met during the eclipse back in April at Sovereignty Ranch. We were at the Confluence Eclipse event where I was doing the sound bath, and him and Aaron Apke and Chris August were doing this amazing cannabis meditation with breaths and beats, and they were really going through teaching us how to use the cannabis while doing breath work, while tuning into our bodies, and that's kind of where I think this whole plant medicine world was always supposed to be about, right? To be able to go through these sacred journeys of spirituality internally and higher divine powers. And I think today we've taken it such a recreational place. So I love to kind of get more of your history of like, how did this story come about for you to have this to really go into cannabis? Because I think you're in Boston, right?
Yeah, I'm in
Yeah,
Boston.
and it's legally. I assume it's legal there. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yep, fully
So
recreational legal.
yeah, so it's been a huge revolution in the cannabis space, and I was in LA also. I experienced it as well, but like people were not creating places for cannabis to be experienced in the higher realms, right? Like where you have these club scenes for alcohol, we didn't have that for cannabis. I think people were trying to, but had left before that. So I love where Ryan, you're taking it into that conscious, spiritual space. I love for you to kind of share your story with that.
Yeah, I love this, man. And I'll start out by saying that just like you were just alluding to, like even though so many of us find something we enjoy about this plant, we also have never gotten a user manual for it, right? So most of us are winging it at best. And then you couple in the fact that for many of us, we grew up in a time where it was completely illegal. We had to risk persecution and prosecution at just learning how to use a natural plant that God put on this planet, right? And so, again, at the end of the day, like a lot of what I do and a lot of what we're going to talk about today is hopefully going to fill in some of those missing gaps between us enjoying cannabis and actually learning how to utilize it as a spiritual aid and ally for transformation and healing. And so for me, all of this started when I was 16 and I, started experiencing what I would now call generalized anxiety disorder. And so I went to the doctor because at that point I was completely programmed to think that the guy or gal in the white lab coat would be able to tell me all the answers. So I go there, and after a whopping 5-minute meeting, he tells me I have anxiety. Now, a little bit of like, foreshadowing of what's to come. A lot of what I'm into now and what I mix cannabis with is story work, right? How everything in our lives is a story, right? So at the end of the day, when he told me I had anxiety, that then created a story or began to create a story around what I could do as someone with anxiety. And what happened was every pharmaceutical that he tried putting me on, and we probably went through about 10 before I finally said enough is enough. But every time he would put me on one, it would actually make me feel less connected to myself, is how I would describe it in words of today. And at a certain point, I started wondering, like, is this the way my life is going to be forever? You know, it was almost like the medication was even worse than the diagnosis. And I think this is a really common theme for a lot of people. You know, they go and they exhaust all the Western medicine options and they start to feel very scared. They're like, what else is there? And, you know, like I always say, when the fear of staying the same outweighs the fear of change, that's when change will occur. And so I was talking to a friend one day around this time, and he had mentioned that he experienced something similar. Again, as a 16-year-old, I'm not really sure how this conversation went, but what I can imagine is that, you know, we were talking about this idea of anxiety, and he was like, hey, cannabis helps me for that. And Charlie, like, I was a just say no kid. You know, I thought drugs were the devil, all the things. I bought into all of it. I had never tried anything except, like, I stole a Zima from my mom when I was like 14, right? That was about it. Anyone who remembers Zima's, shout out, you know, those are really fun when you're like 14. But
Yeah.
you know, again, like, at a certain point, I was like, what do I have to lose? And so I tried it. And the first time didn't really feel much. You know, I was hesitant to take too much because I, you know, bought into all the propaganda around it. So the second time didn't really feel much. The third time I tried it, I had a little more courage because I had already tried it twice and I hadn't died. So I decided, like, well, let me see what happens if I take a few more hits than just one. And in that experience, what happened, the conclusion of it was that I realized and knew, like, embodied the knowledge that I was not my thoughts, that I didn't have anxiety, that who I really was not the one that actually had anxiety or even was the one that was experiencing it, but it was the one that was observing all of these things happen within me. Now, again, as a 16-year-old, I had no context for what the hell just happened. All I knew was that after that third experience, I felt liberated from the anxiety. I would still feel it come up, but I didn't identify with it anymore. And so here I was, a 16-year-old that had exhausted Western med, had tried something that was a little more Eastern medicine oriented, and had found, wow, this really helped me. But the challenge was that I was still running the program that I had been brought up in, where I didn't think that what cannabis was doing was actually just showing me myself unadulterated. So what ended up happening was, like many people, I wrongly assumed I feel uncomfortable. This plant can make me feel more comfortable. So I guess I just need more and more of that all the time to feel comfortable. And so I decided to continue connecting with cannabis and connecting with quite a bit of it. And around this time, most of my friends were too. So it wasn't abnormal or anything like that. And, you know, again, in terms of like dependencies, addictions, et cetera, you know, when you look at a cannabis one, it's like, yeah, maybe you have a little less motivation. Maybe you're eating a little more. But again, at the end of the day, like, it was a pretty safe plant to do that with. And so it wasn't until a couple of years later when I started school for psychology that I woke up one day and went to go to the bathroom and started peeing blood. Had no idea why. And obviously, this was a challenge for me. So I told my dad and he rushed me to the hospital. And on the way there, he starts asking me, he's like, son, I just got to know, are you doing drugs? And I said, no, but I am smoking a shit ton of pot, is how I put it. Right. I remember those words clear as day. And, you know, I thought he would get upset with me. I thought maybe he would be disappointed, right? The famous, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed speech. But actually, I saw him have a sigh of relief out of the corner of my eye. And that was very interesting. And of course, like, you know, while I'm driving to the hospital or while I'm being driven to the hospital, the least of my worries was his reaction. But because I was so tuned in and aware, because I was so anxious in the moment, like, why the hell am I peeing blood? I did notice that. So when I went to the hospital, I was there for 4 days. They ended up finding a benign cyst on my kidney. Luckily, it wasn't cancerous, that had broken open, put blood in my urine. So they were just watching me, things like that. So while I was there, I brought my laptop and I started showing my dad a lot of the research I'd been doing on cannabis. And to his credit, he didn't have any cognitive dissonance. He was like, wow, I guess I just didn't know what I didn't know. And one of the main things I showed him was a documentary called Leaf with this guy, Dr. William Courtney. Great little documentary. I think it's like, you know, 30 minutes long, maybe even less. And it's basically about this guy who meets this woman, a patient of his, that has like 11 or more autoimmune disorders. So she's in dire straits. And she's basically going to pass away if they can't figure this out. And again, it's a common story. She's exhausted everything Western medical could give her. And now she's with Dr. William Courtney, and he starts her on a juicing protocol. So just juicing cannabis leaves. So what I want
Mm.
everyone to know here is that this is not intoxicating. You don't need to get high to benefit from cannabis. So this woman was just juicing cannabis leaves and cannabis flower. And over the course of, I believe, 6 to 8 months, he ended up putting every single one of her disorders into remission. And then at the end, they get married. And now they do this work together. So it's a really nice, beautiful little rom-com
Oh,
in a way, you know,
yeah,
but very
nice.
realistic as a documentary. And so after that, you know, when I showed my dad that, he was like, okay, you know what? Like, I can clearly see this plant is helping you. You're in school, you have a dream, you have a relationship, you have a job. Like, who am I to tell you? You're an adult, right? So after that, it became a bonding point for my father and I. And he didn't connect with cannabis. He had tried it once in the 80s and, got super paranoid and ended up under a kitchen table thinking the cops were coming after him. So it wasn't exactly his plant of choice, but he was always very interested in anything that I was interested in. He used to bring me to metal shows when I was a kid, which I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him. But, he was a really good supporter in every little venture I went into. And so a couple of years later, I started, having a dark night of the soul of sorts because I started realizing like, I don't want to wear khakis the rest of my life. So what the hell am I going to do with this degree I'm going to get? And one year I went to the Boston Freedom Rally, which is a big public display of disobedience where you go out into the green, everyone connects with cannabis. Before it was legal, it was a much bigger thing, much bigger deal. But as long as you're not selling cannabis or doing anything that stupid, the cops don't bother you. And it was all for legalization, and legalization movement. And so I come out of the subway tunnel that year when I'm going, and I hear a guy yelling, "Who wants to make butter with me?" So I walk over to his tent, his little gazebo, and he's passing out these pamphlets for a new school opening up only 5 minutes from where I was living at the time. That was called the New England Grassroots Institute. So they specialized in cannabis study, but they also taught holistic health and a lot of other stuff too. Now, this was the first time ever that I felt a heck yes from my heart. So I go home being a broke college student and I'm like, "Dad, can you help me with tuition?" I think it was like $500. And he goes, "Yeah, but I'd like to come with you if that's cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, totally." So my dad and I start going to the school together. And, first day in there, I'm like, this is what I want to do with my life. And again, this is 2011. So there's no industry here. We had decriminalization in 2008. But at this point, the only way that you would get into a cannabis industry was to move out to California and get into the medical industry. That's all that really existed at that point. So it's funny to look back to there and realize how much has changed just so quickly. So I end up going to the school with my dad. We end up just having a blast there. And after a few months of going there, I passed level 1, I passed level 2, and then they hire me as an intern, and I start working directly with her, with the two people that own the school and the cancer patients they were helping on the side. That was a big part of what they did at the school was they would give out RSO, aka Rick Simpson oil, to people that either couldn't afford it, couldn't grow their own, et cetera, because there was no dispensaries at that time. So I got to see with my own two eyes the real power of cannabis. But the thing was, that the real power I had thought I had figured out, even though it's amazing to think that cannabis can cure and treat cancer, which it can, I've seen it with my own two eyes, that's still a very physical thing, right? Now, again, it's beautiful, it's amazing, but a couple of years later, I would realize why my soul had set me up with those lessons. So in 2014, I ended up going to my first music festival and I do MDMA for the first time. And during that experience, I felt a really interesting pull towards my dad, but I didn't really know what it was. So I come home from that experience and my dad informs me that while I was out in Vegas having fun, he had gone in for some lung pain he was having and he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it was already terminal at that point. They gave him 3 months to live. They didn't tell me that at that point, or he didn't tell me that at that point. But he elected not to do chemo or radiation because he had seen a lot of family members on his side had gone through that. He had been driving his brother every week for 3 years to Dana-Farber in Boston and had watched what those, modalities had done to people he loved. And he was like, "Fuck that. I'm going out with my dignity and I'm going out with my hair," because he had a great head of hair. That's where I get it from. And so after a couple of weeks, he started experiencing some pretty severe pain. And at this point, he still had not connected with cannabis again. This is, since the 80s. So I started convincing him. I was like, "Dad, we had started growing together when we started going to the school. And it was a fun hobby that him and I did together. And I was like, why don't we take this last harvest and have me turn it into RSO and start administering it to you to help with your pain, and give you some, some credence in your final days." And reluctantly, he agreed. And so what I thought I was going to do in, watching over him on this medicine was just make sure he, had help going to the bathroom, have his questions answered, things like that. But Charlie, what actually happened, and this is why I say it in my bio, is that I really discovered the true power of cannabis because, I'm an only child. I knew my dad very well, or so I thought. We were going to breakfast every Sunday. We were going to car shows together. He supported me in every venture in my life. And all of a sudden, he takes this cannabis and he's a completely different person. His walls come completely down. He's much more spiritual, is how I would describe it. He's talking to me about death, but not from like an anxiety point, but more of like a celebration. Like, what do you think happens when you die? And this person I thought I knew completely transformed into this person that was much more holistically who and what he was meant to be on this planet, in my opinion. And through the time that we were getting his scans back, he had small cell carcinoma. So it was a very aggressive cancer. And every single scan he got back, the tumors had been slowing their growth. Still there because he was still smoking cigarettes and drinking soda and everything like that, but they were slowing. And they had given him until Halloween at best. They were like, if you make it to Halloween, you're lucky. And he got diagnosed July 9th. He didn't pass until the following June of 2015. And through that time, my dad and I got to really connect. I got to watch him have closure with his grandchildren, his other children from previous marriages, my mother, himself, and me, and really got to create this closure that I don't know if I would have gotten had it not been for cannabis. I can't go back and try it again and see if it would be different. But after that experience, I really had a fire lit under my ass because I had just experienced something that I had no context for. I wasn't even really spiritual at that point, necessarily. I was interested in it, but I had no idea what I was doing. But from that experience, I knew there was more to this plan, and I knew there was more to the human experience too as a result of it. So I ended up working at a dispensary after that for 5 years, worked with over 5,000 medical patients on a range of different disorders. And what I found there was that I started having lines form for my register, which was very awkward at first because, everyone that worked there was great. But I was obsessed with holistic health, self-development, exercise, all these things that I didn't really think went with cannabis other than yoga and things like that. But what I started realizing was when these people would come in and they say, hey, this strain that usually works for me isn't working anymore, I would just naturally start asking them, like, what are your sleep habits like? Are you taking breaks from cannabis? Are you supplementing with dark chocolate that releases anandamide? Are you moving your body every day? Are you getting sunlight? All these questions. And they would usually say, no, none, not doing any of it. And I would get them doing some of it. And all of a sudden they'd come in and say, hey, wow, like this cannabis works way better now. And so I started having this theory that self-development and cannabis could somehow mix together. But it wasn't until 2019 when I had a great opportunity. I didn't look at it that way when it happened. It triggered the absolute hell out of me. But a corporation came in and bought out the dispensary I'd been working at. So it went from a very family run, very loose type structure to now everything I had avoided my whole life, right? It felt like everything that I had avoided, all that boring corporate bullshit was now coming into my life. And of course, I played the victim at first. Why are they doing this to me? Oh my God, this is so terrible. But it got me motivated enough to go out to MJ BizCon in 2019 and find my own investors and try to start my own dispensary is what I thought I wanted to do. So I go out there with Rachel and a mutual friend of ours, Devin, who was working at the dispensary. We were kind of the aspiring entrepreneurs there. We go out there with all these expectations of finding these investors. It was going to be simple. And what really happened was we walked right into the belly of the beast. Like it was like we walked directly into corporate cannabis headquarters. And so on the last day there, I was feeling pretty beat up, pretty frustrated, pretty down. And I asked Rachel, hey, what do you want to do on our last day? Do you want to go home and try to figure out a plan, go back to the hotel? And what she responded with was, do you want to take some Molly and hit a strip club? And so at this point, right, like best girlfriend ever for 500, please, Alex. But but what ended up happening was I had a lot of expectations up to that point, Charlie, right? I went out there with a mission. Now, at this point, I just thought I'm going to go have some fun, hang out in Vegas. I had never been to a strip club. She had never been to one. We had no idea what to expect other than they're going to be stripping there. But other than that, I had no idea. So we lost all expectation. We were just going to have a fun night. So we walk in and we end up just connecting with a couple of the strippers and we end up having like a whole life conversation for like 5 hours. And I end up losing track of time. We don't leave till 7:30 a.m. And Rachel had asked me specifically to make sure we were out of there by 4 a.m. So in that moment, she got pretty frustrated. And typically my pattern at that time would try to be to manipulate my way out of the situation and make it seem like it wasn't really my fault because I felt terrible. I didn't want to take that guilt on, right? I didn't want to own it. But what ended up happening in that heart open state was I just took it and I was like, yeah, I foobarred this. Now, it didn't seem like a decision that would change the entire trajectory of my life, but sometimes that's how it goes. And so the next day on the plane, I'm like, what happened last night? Like when I took accountability for that, which isn't how I would even state it back then, but like I knew something had shifted in me. And my soul started sharing with me, like, well, you're feeling emotion. Like you're not passing off your guilt onto other people. You're really owning everything. And when you do that, you can forgive yourself, you can forgive others, and life becomes more beautiful. And I was like, wow, how, like, why haven't I been doing this the whole time? And they were like, well, every night you numb out with cannabis, you numb out keeping yourself in cycles of go, 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 and all these things. And so I then wrongly assumed once again, oh, cannabis did this to me. Oh my God, I'm addicted to it. So I went home, I took a 3-month break, cold turkey, and had a beautiful Kundalini awakening during that time. But after about 6 weeks, I had the second idea or awareness point hit me, which was, wait a minute, isn't blaming cannabis just doing more of what I was doing before, blaming the external world for my internal challenges? So then I took ownership over that. And I was like, no, this plant never held a gun to my head. This plant is just a plant growing in the world, right? Like what I choose to do with it is my responsibility to take accountability for. So after the 12th week, I ended up deciding to go back to cannabis. And I was like, okay, let me try something out. Let me look at my own patterns of the plant, which were mostly to numb out on weeknights because I didn't like the job I was working at and I didn't feel powerful enough to change that situation for me. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna only connect on weekends. And the way I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna utilize intention the same way I do for my water, food, etc. And I'm just gonna see what happens. And so all week, what I would do is I would find where I got triggered. I would write all those things out. And then on the weekend, I would make my intention to go directly into the trigger. And what started happening was I started realizing that cannabis is a lot of things, but for me, it's the ultimate forgiveness medicine. And if you think about the whole idea of the illusion we're in here, this is all a dream anyway. We're only meeting ourselves. The reason some people get triggered over something where another person doesn't is because nothing is objectively good or bad. But if you get triggered over something, it's because there's something in you that you would rather blame that person for instead of looking at yourself. And what I found with cannabis is that it is an incredible medicine at allowing you to safely see what you're getting triggered at in yourself. And so the next 3 years after that, really things got crazy. I ended up getting into coaching, and any one of these things could be another hour-long monologue. So I'm going to wrap this up. But I ended up getting into coaching, thinking I was going to be a mindset coach, thinking, oh, my whole psych degree is coming back in. And I would travel around to these different groups. During the pandemic, flight prices were stupid cheap. So I was going everywhere, and I would bring my cannabis with me. And it was kind of like my thing, like, hey, I'm the new guy in the group, but this is what I can bring to the table. And people started having some really wild experiences with it. So much so that a little down the road, I ended up gifting Paul Chek some, and he said the same thing. He was like, dude, I've never had any cannabis like this. And through him, I ended up meeting Aubrey Marcus, Kyle Kingsbury, Shervin Jaffaria, Ben Greenfield, Sugar Sean O'Malley, Tim Welch. I mean, all these people I had looked up to in different realms forever. And they were all like blown away at what I had been doing with cannabis. And Paul was really the one to push me into actually creating a program out of this. So my first program, Connect with Cannabis, was born as a result of Paul pushing me and pulling me towards like, hey, man, I see more than you see in yourself right now, and you can really do this. And so fast forward 4 years later, I've gone on the Aubrey Marcus podcast. I've done things that I still can barely believe happened. And it's just, I hope that what my story imbues to everyone is that for most of you listeners, it might not be conscious cannabis you're into. It might not be astrology. But when you follow your heart, right? When you follow your heart, you will end up exactly where you're meant to be, hanging out with the people that you're meant to be with, doing the things that are firing you up. And I wish there was a better formula I could give anyone for how I went about doing this. But I'm telling you guys, like, I was not in an empowered state of mind. I was a very victimized, disempowered man. And I ended up utilizing cannabis to manifest the entire future that I have right now. And I don't credit cannabis for that, just the same way as I don't credit a coach for creating my reality. But I do credit a coach or cannabis for allowing me to see the aspects of myself that were in my shadow and love them enough to bring them back into my whole so that then I could go out into the world and feel really empowered to be my full self. And so, that's where I'm going to stop it right now. But again, there's many different aspects that we can go into any part of that journey, but that's a really good overview of how I got into this screen with you here today and why, of all medicines, I'm on cannabis. I did not choose cannabis. Cannabis has chosen me over and over and over and over again. So it's been a really fun journey.
Wow, thank you for that. That's such a really important um place to be at, with understanding that the journey of healing actually starts with you, right? And nothing that you do take or you're doing is actually, replacing what you're going through internally. And that's really important. That's the whole idea of the self-healing journey, right? The idea that we're always healing ourselves, but a lot of times we do blame certain things and we don't realize that it's actually, if you're at fault, then you're also the solution to all your problems, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just such a powerful concept. I love to kind of share my own story. I'm also a late bloomer, right? I totally believe in the whole dare thing. I came to this country, so already I was like, let's just, want to be like other Americans. Otherwise, if I, and obviously I was not gonna touch anything that was drug induced because you're like, hey, dare told you not to do it. So already I'm like, I better like not get arrested because I came to this country. They're gonna look at me and arrest me. Um,
Yeah.
but it was towards the end of college where I was about 21 already and had been in a house full of roommates, and everyone, I mean, in USC LA, like everyone already had done drugs. And so for me, I
Yeah.
was like hanging out with my roommate, and he was a really good guy, like really trusted him. I really listened to his advice, and he's like, he had just come back from a rave and he was like, doing Molly. And I was like, what is this stuff you guys go? Like, why are you doing this to yourself? And he's like, Charlie, like, it is not what you think it is. I'm like, why? Like, and at the time I was a very like, for me, it was, if you guys know astrology, I'm a big stickler to rules, to laws, to OCD. Like I was like, if you follow this, if A, then B all the time, no matter what, right? Science says if it's replicable, you can keep doing it. But I was stuck in my life where I was following the engineering program, right? Like I was an engineer, just follow the ABCs and you'll be fine. But like I wasn't happy, and I was just going through a breakup and I was like, I'm kind of lost. Like, I'm going through what I'm supposed to be. Like I'm an Asian kid going to like engineering, already like 3 years into my life. And I'm like, is this me? Is this just what I'm supposed to be? And so I really struggled. And so my friend's like, Charlie, I think you need to like smoke some pot. I'm like, no, that's like bad for you. Like, I'm gonna go and become really a bad person, right? And I was at the time thinking bad and good. There was no such thing as like you could heal from problems, right? I just thought if you do that, you're bad. If you do that, you're good. And so so he told my friend, my whole housemates, like seven of us, were like, Charlie's gonna try weed for the first time. It was like a big thing because everybody had already done it for like 10 years. And I was like a virgin at it. So like they all wanted to experience that first time that someone, and plus I was much older, so I had much more responsibility, much more aware of things. And so when I did it, I thought it was the most amazing thing. Because the first thing that happens is almost like the weight of life gets removed off of you, right? We talk about inhibition. So for me, there was this inhibition where suddenly I was making jokes again. I was laughing. Everything was funny to me, and so I got the giggles at first right away. And I think it's what you experience right away is what you're actually suppressing in life, right? And
Yeah.
so like for me, like I didn't call myself, I didn't have anxiety, but I was an Asian man with tiger mom. So I obviously was born with anxiety when I was born. And so I really felt the effects of like feeling myself suddenly for the first time, and that like I didn't have a care in the world, because even today I'm still struggling with some of the people pleasing that I experienced coming up to this country. But but the cannabis like really put me into a place of like just being myself, and I was like, whoa, this is very interesting and different. Now fast forward, I wasn't doing it actually that often at that point. I was thought it was a really cool experience. It really made me think about myself a little bit more, which is not something that we do as Asian kids, right? Because we're always supposed to be like trying to be striving to be the best because your mom thinks that another guy is better than you, right? So you're always trying
Mhm.
to externalize that you're not good enough. And so fast forward to actually, it was Disney when I was, going into games, and I was like not experiencing the play that I used to experience when I was a kid. And so I tried it again, and that's when it really clicked. It allowed me to again be myself again. Where like people say like alcohol allows you to be yourself and takes out the liquid courage.
Mm.
Same thing with cannabis. Now again, just like everybody goes to the bout of that level of addiction, or really like as if like without it you won't be this, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, many years has passed. I mean, and that's the thing too is there's different strains of cannabis. So a lot of times people don't realize when they say, "Oh, you're not gonna do anything." Y'all, I was so productive on cannabis. You guys don't even understand because I'm already a very productive person. Like I'm always looking for the next thing to do. But for some reason, when I smoke specifically sativas, I'm a big fan of sativas and hybrids. It allowed me to actually, instead of, because I was revving my car up, right? Like my life, I was always pushing myself to the 100% because I thought if I didn't, then I would be a failure.
Mm.
And so suddenly, like it taught me that, like, no, you don't have to rev up. Just chill for a bit, and then when you know you need to rev it up, rev it up. And so cannabis allowed me to. There's a really beautiful metaphor where you guys remember Harry Potter and one of the games where it has that egg, and you open the egg and it like it's really loud and like really like bursts your ears, and you're like, oh my god, that's so intense. But you put it in water and suddenly it sounds really beautiful.
Mm.
That's my brain on cannabis. Like when I
Mm.
wasn't smoking at that point, I think I was just overdoing everything in my life. And so it's almost like I wasn't enjoying my life, but I was doing all the things I'm supposed to do.
Mm.
When I got on cannabis, I'm still doing the things I'm supposed to do, but I loved it. I loved
Mm,
it so much that it allowed me to actually start to discern what is it in my heart that I want to do versus what I'm being told I'm supposed to do because that's what required of me as an Asian male, as my, the son to my mother, to my dad, to all these people expecting me to be a certain way.
mm,
And so now fast forward to today, like I know that I also recently kind of had to go, hey, I think I'm overdoing it. And I wanted to get a point where like I don't need it. And so I took a huge break. But actually what happened is then you start to go deeper into what's missing, what you're going in. And this is why I love your story when you said that like all the triggers, I wrote it down so that when I went into cannabis, I was using it on purpose, and that's
yeah.
very powerful, you guys. Like I think too many of us use it recreationally because we do have all this anxiety, which is unfortunately what this culture loves to do to us. And so
Hmm.
when you kind of tone down the anxiety, you now have what I tell people, you suddenly have choice because until then, you're kind of like living with other people's expectations. But when cannabis kicks in, it's almost like you have choice. You can either do it or don't do it, but your heart will beat harder because you love it.
Hmm.
And I think that what cannabis allows you to appreciate is like it's a very heart opening, chakra opening space where it really helps you tune into it. And that's why it can be very addicting because suddenly you love yourself so much and you want to do all the things that your heart wants to do. And then what happens and you get into the space of like you want to play too much and you don't do
Hmm.
the things you're supposed to do, which is go through shadow work, go through like the things you're avoiding. So for me, I realized, hey, I'm avoiding stuff because as soon as I get anxious, I would just jump on it. And so
Yeah.
now, I do practice actually soberness during the week because I want those triggers like you to pop up again. Because a lot of times what happens is you're like, I'm triggered, I'm gonna go smoke weed. Versus, I'm triggered and the next day it doesn't go away. That means I have to process this trigger. And so it's beautiful that because alcohol, like a lot of us, we're doing alcohol only in the weekends, right? Hang out with friends. We went, I mean, the alcoholics are probably doing every day, but
Of course.
like a lot of us. And so for cannabis, I was doing every day. And I was like, no, I need to actually allow it to be more sacred again. And that's
Mm,
the thing where we're both in that space where we want this plant to be more sacred. I'm in Texas now. I was in California where it was illegal, everyone was doing it. But now I'm in Texas. It's ironically everyone's doing it, but no one's talking about it
yes.
because it's federally illegal in this state. And so, but yet like Delta 9s and 8s are legal. And so really I want somebody who smokes weed, I look at both of them and go, if I can't tell, the cops can't tell. So the cops are not going to come after anyone for weed now. And
Hmm.
so it made me realize that, and like Houston is a great place for cannabis, but how many people are using it recreationally versus actually use it as a sacred plant? And then mushroom is really big here too. So now I'm asking like, how much psychedelics are being done in the state, but like isn't being used to support your spiritual awakening, to support your spiritual experience. And that's why I think it's really beautiful that we can now have a discussion and talk deeper about all these things that ironically the government told us not to do, yet everybody who ran into the end of Western medicine had to go into the things that the government didn't allow us to do. And what's really one last thing I'd like to share is like as I was studying this plant, one of the things that they taught us is there's a lot of mind control in this country. And we don't have to go delve into that, but this was the whole idea of MK Ultra, paperclip, and the Nazis being here, after World War II. But cannabis breaks down mind control,
Hmm.
because it allows your heart to be involved in the decisions you make. Where in mind control, if you are nothing, you are willing to be anything. And this is where a lot of mind control goes into, is it goes into this beta, like you're going to like work for us. And so your heart has no purpose. And so we tune out to that. But actually cannabis allows us to tune into it more deeply and it allows us to really go into that. So I love how, you also like all of us have experienced, the addiction part of it. I mean, that's the shadow of it, yes. But again, like if you're gonna like say, hey, there's bad things for it and you throw it away, it's the same thing with every prescription drug, in every medicine we use, even in Eastern medicine, you're only supposed to use for 2 weeks. After that, you need to stop because you need to go back into your sober state. And
Hmm.
so what's beautiful is you are actually teaching how to practice into the medicine space and not using it as a crutch that today I think so many younger adults are running into, right? Because they don't have the responsibilities or the understanding of how to use it much more productively, and that's why it's very powerful to understand how the medicine is used. We actually here in the acupuncture school that I work for, they are now teaching marijuana syndromes. I have a book here, like y'all, it's like 3,000 pages. It's a lot because marijuana, or really the cannabis plant, has been used in many, many, many cultures. The Tibetans used it because one of the things that it does is it allows you to go deeper into the temptations. Because
Mm,
it's easy to be tempted when there's like nothing around. You're like, oh, are you tempted to do that? No. Why? Because there's nothing around that. And then
mm,
if you are tempted with the actual plant around, that's when you really test your willpower. And I think that's why like the sacred plants are supposed to teach us more of who we are. And so I really appreciate this story. And I love to, because I think a lot of people say it's a gateway to, and then they say
yeah.
like gateway to bad stuff. I'm like, no, it's a gateway to your heart and your soul. And so that's a
Yeah.
very important conversation that I think is important to talk about. And so I love to kind of go into this next phase of like, I love to hear more about the people that you work with, because even for me, like when I was in the dispensary, I was doing this. Well, we were a delivery, and so
Mm.
the old people would call me, and they're like, "Oh my God, I cannot drive to the dispensary. I'm so glad you guys can drive, some medicine to me." And so I would talk to these older people, and they would share with me why cannabis helped them. And to me, like I never felt like I was providing some kind of, recreational drug to people, because it was always these older folks who had medicinal problems that were
Mm.
calling. So I'd love for you to share some of that, because I do believe like cannabis has a place for the self-healing journey.
Yeah, dude, I love that context, man. And the first thing I'll say too, just to touch on a little bit of what you said, is that, like, why don't we ask like what the real problem here is, right? Like with everything we talked about, right? Addiction, mind control, all these different things, right? And how I look at it is that we really have no idea who and what we truly are. Intellectually, a lot of us can say, oh, we're spirit, we are God embodied in human form. But how many of us have actually experienced that and lived through it each and every moment of every day? Very few. And as a result, when you combine the mind control, the programming, everything that is so unconscious to us that we can barely even understand it. Like, put it this way, a commonly held belief is that as we get older, we have to look older and we break down. Did you know that they actually did an experiment in the 90s, the CIA did, where they took people that were in their 80s and, different degrees of failing health, and they put them on a mock setting that was like 1940 something. So for these people, when they were living in that time, they were in like their prime, 20s, 30s, etc. When they put them back into this area, they stopped using walkers, they stopped using canes, they started being able to sit crisscross applesauce with no pain that they'd never been able to do in the last 40 years. All of a sudden, this whole thing started unraveling. So when I say that like the mind control goes deeper than any of us could ever imagine, I think like for me, when I first heard mind control, I thought NLP, programming like through advertisement, things that like we think of often, but it goes much deeper than that. Like all the way back to what Jesus is, if you choose to believe in Jesus. I'm not a religious guy, but I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, the historical use of cannabis. Cannabis has been utilized in the way we're talking about for over 10,000 years. There's almost never been a spiritual practice and anywhere in the world that did not include cannabis. So, again, and for anyone who wants to fact check that, please do, because I don't expect anyone nor want anyone to believe what I'm saying at face value. That's more of how we got to this challenge we're in, is that a lot of us believed things at face value, dare program, things like that. I want people to get inspired from this, but also question it. Go do your own research, right? See these things for yourself so that you can unprogram yourself as well. And when you got into a little bit of the, you were productive already, so it brought up more productivity in you. What cannabis really is a non-specific amplifier, which basically means that it's going to be more of whatever you already are. So if you're a lazy person, chances are it's going to make you lazier, right? But it's not really making you lazier. It's allowing you to be more rooted in who and what you truly are. So maybe in this lifetime, you have a story that you're lazy, right? So cannabis goes abracadabra. I guess that's what you want because you're not being conscious with your intention to, let's say, overcome laziness or things like that. I think for a lot of us, we're not intentional. We don't know our power. We don't know who we are. So we just treat it like a medication, right? Oh, you know what? I'm just going to take this plant, smoke a bunch of it, and I'll feel some sort of better, aka dissociated. But then the next day, they wake up and they feel just as shitty again. So they have to go back to the plant over and over again. Then what do? I'm addicted to cannabis. It's cannabis's fault, right? When in reality, what it is that, put it this way, if the government and the powers that shouldn't be tell us that white bread should be on the food pyramid, it doesn't stop there, man. Like we have no awareness. Like, again, for people who listen to your show, I imagine they do. But you look at the general public, they have no awareness around trauma, emotional regulation, mindset, diet, health, connection. Like we're completely backwards as our society. And so as a result, what happens is they are unaware that what cannabis is doing is essentially allowing you to enter safe mode on your computer. So what happens is that if you have a virus or a multitude of viruses on your computer and you try to go on the internet, it's going to be really slow. It might not even let you go on there, right? So you may think, okay, you know what? Maybe I need to start in safe mode. So you start in safe mode and now you can peruse the internet. But if you just stop there and you're like, well, I can go into safe mode and my computer works like, I don't know, 10% like it usually does. Well, that's still surviving, right? And that's what most people are doing with cannabis. Well, I feel like shit, but if I smoke this joint, then I have a couple of hours of feeling at least not like full shit. But then they come back into their normal operating system and everything is still there. The challenge is that people have never learned how cannabis is actually meant to operate within the human experience and what it's really here to do. It allows us to switch our brain waves from beta, where our ego, our default mode network, et cetera, are directly there, into alpha, which is really good for the flow state, and then also theta, which is the doorway to the subconscious. And what do we know about the subconscious? That's where all our trauma, our subconscious programs, all of this shit that allows our conscious reality to not be great exists. And so what happens is people either get into the subconscious and they're like, wow, I felt numbed out for a little while. I felt good. Or on the other hand, they maybe have done that a lot of times and they feel like, oh, cannabis and I were like this. We get along. Then they have an experience where they get into the subconscious and there's a lot of anxiety and paranoia in there. And now they're like, whoa, cannabis made me anxious and paranoid. I'm never using that again. Because they're unaware, like, dude, that's actually what you're looking for. Like, that's actually a huge win. Because if you know how to let go and process that and use forgiveness to move you through that, now you can actually remove that program from your operating system. And when you come back into your sober state of reality, you actually have a better experience of life now because you're starting to consciously choose what is you and what is not you. Like what programs now as an adult you're choosing to have within you versus which ones were inherited through your parents, your lineage, through society, et cetera, that now you're realizing thanks, but no thanks. And so I wanted to give that context too. A couple of the points you were talking about were really big on that. And when we look into, my experience working with patients and things like that, what I will say is that you hit it nail on the head, man. Like the biggest age group of people that were coming into the dispensary were 55 plus. So baby boomer generation, and a lot of them had not used cannabis since the 70s. Some of them had never utilized it ever. And the great thing about cannabis, and I touched on it a little bit in my story, but I want to reiterate it here, is that I'm not coming here telling everyone that cannabis is your ticket, right? Cannabis is the plan for everyone. It's not, because not everyone is meant to experience the intoxicating aspects of it. That being said, though, every single person, I don't care how much you may hate cannabis, I don't care how much you have an identity around being a sober person, every single person has an endocannabinoid system, which is the largest regulatory system in our entire body. And within it is the collection of CB1 and CB2 receptor sites. And what's happening in our world right now with glyphosate and EMFs and a lot of different things is that a lot of us have a faulty endocannabinoid system. And so even if someone is like, yeah, I like control in life, I like being sober, et cetera, I really believe that every single person can benefit from juicing raw cannabis and or supplementing with phytocannabinoids, CBD products, things like that. Because for a lot of us, our largest regulatory system that deals with everything from nervous system regulation to appetite, sleep, et cetera, is completely screwed up. A theory I have too is that if you look back through antiquity, there's almost never a time that we weren't consuming hemp. Hemp was so important in the original Jamestown colonies that it was required by law that every single person had to grow hemp. Because not only can you eat it and it's a complete protein, you can make rope out of it, you can make paper out of it, and there's about, I don't know, 800 other uses for it. You can make oil with it, you can build houses with it. I mean, if you really want to understand why cannabis became illegal, spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with the government giving a shit about your health. They do not care at all. Anytime they're telling you they care, look the other way and do the opposite, because they are coming from a negative polarized state, and everything there is egocentric, me, I'll control the world to fit my narrative, etc. So you want none of that. But when I was working in the industry, I got to see firsthand how this plant would not just help people physically with inflammation relief and, things of that nature, cancer, like I mentioned, which is a big one, but also how it would affect them emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. There were a lot of people that came in to the dispensary that were elderly, older, all their family is dead. They don't have any friends. And so they'd come in very scared. I mean, they come into the store and there's rap music bumping and there's strains like green crack on the menu. And they're like, what the hell did I just walk into? Right. But
Yeah.
one of my favorite parts of it was, all of us that worked there were amazing. I really give credit to everyone that worked there in those early days because we were all in it for the right reason. A lot of us came from a world that was not, oh, let's go get rich from cannabis. It was, hey, we've been doing this illegally for years and this is the hill we die on. And so that was the kind of person working there right when it started. And it would be so amazing for me to watch these people come in very nervous, especially like the elderly old ladies, right? They're coming in, they're hobbling with a cane or a walker, and we invite them over and we sit with them sometimes for 3, 4 hours, and just answer all their questions, right? And after that first time they leave, they come back in the second time, and you can tell they're a little less anxious, right? They come in and maybe they see the person they work with and they wave to them. And now they're kind of like, okay, cool. I stand in this line. They know what to expect now. And by the fifth or sixth time, them coming in and saying, this is the best part of my day. Even if I don't want to buy anything, sometimes I just come in to hang out with you guys because it's such a cool environment. And that is what cannabis culture is all about. It's not about getting high. It's not about even the health benefits. It's not about any one of those things. It's about connection. It's about really being able to connect with yourself to a degree where you can allow your heart, just like you said, to lead you to the people, places, and things that are really meant for you. Because at the end of the day, we are all walking each other home and we are all one being. And that is not something that can be understood intellectually the same way it can be experientially understood. And what cannabis does for so many people is that even though psilocybin, ayahuasca, all these other medicines can do this too, cannabis is the most accessible, it's the most normalized now, and it's the most approachable. Someone doesn't even need to get high to benefit from the medicine. And even if they do get high, they can titrate their dose now with all the technology and science that's out to be a very little microdose
Hmm.
that all of a sudden spawns a thread that can change their entire life. And so I got to witness these things with my own two eyes, people coming in, stopping using walkers, starting to light up more, starting to talk to people, making career changes because they're seeing how much fun we're having. And they're like, oh my God, I haven't had that much fun in years. Like so many things like that. I could tell you all the stories about glaucoma, Crohn's disease, obviously cancer and things of that nature, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, all of these things. Because if you look into David Hawkins' work and you look into the scale of consciousness and all of these things, is it that cannabis is curing these things? No, it's that something in cannabis is allowing us to remember our own power and that we can heal ourselves. And that's why I really like to look at cannabis like a coach. It's really a coach. It's not going to do the work for you. You could show up to a coaching meeting and the coach could lay out, okay, you're going to go do this, this, and this. But if you don't actually go do those things, the coach is going to be like, what the hell are you coming to me again for, man? You didn't even do what we talked about last time. And that's where most people are at. They're stuck on this cyclical loop of learning the first lesson with cannabis, which is I can dissociate, I can feel numb, and they haven't moved past that. And it's not their fault necessarily, because again, we never got a user manual for the plant, but it now gets to be our responsibility because we did not just come here to be programmed from lizard beings, pay taxes that don't go to our country at all, and die. That's not why we're here, right? And all of us must remember that. And cannabis and other plant medicines, coaching, holistic health, all of these things are rivers that ultimately lead to the same destination. So again, I'm not here to say cannabis is the end all be all. I'm here to allow it to rise back into the conversation with these other psychedelic medicines and other rivers that can lead to the same sea, because the fact it's been bastardized the way it has is completely ridiculous. When you look into reefer madness and how all of this plant became illegal, like I foreshadowed earlier, it really is just a bunch of rich white guys deciding that hemp was going to annihilate the cotton and nylon industries and textile industries,
Yeah.
getting together and making some racist ass propaganda around how this new plant they had never seen before called marijuana, right? Because every doctor was using cannabis at this level. Uh, they started this myth, and you guys can go look this up because what I'm about to say is probably going to trigger some people, but you can go look this up. They literally invented a myth that Mexican men were coming over the border and raping white women with this new plant that had never been seen before called marijuana. And that's how it became illegal. You can go look it up. And then this whole war on drugs, where the fucking CIA and the FBI were implanting crack into low income areas. It's all a fucking farce, right? And the way we get back to that is we stop listening to anyone else except ourselves and the people getting the results we want. I'll say for me, when I look on any news channel and I see the politicians talking, none of them look like they're getting the results that I want. And that's what I tell everyone is even with me, right? If someone's listening and I don't look like the kind of person that's getting the results you want, don't listen to me. Because again, like there's no right or wrong here. There's just who you're meant to become and who can help you get there and what can help you get there. And that's really it. And it's not personal. There's no hard feelings, right? But at the end of the day, the only way to know who and what we should listen to in this realm is to look at who and what are getting the results we want. And if they're getting the results we want, chances are they have codes or keys for us. And for me, that was cannabis. For a lot of other people, it's cannabis as well. For some people, it's not. That's okay. But at the end of the day, I really feel our souls sign up for certain missions in this lifetime. And for whatever reason, mine is to bring the real power of cannabis to the people. And so that's a lot of, what I've seen firsthand working medically with these patients and also now working with clients. I mean, the one thing I'll get into as well, because what I work with people now on is a lot different than I worked on at the dispensary. Dispensary was much more linear 3D, like pain issues, challenges, things like that. The results they got were a little bit more than that. I already talked about the mindset, the emotional components, things like that. But now when I work with people, a lot of what they're coming to me with is this belief that they're really addicted to cannabis. And, again, in a linear 3D way, someone might say they are addicted to cannabis because they're using a lot of it. They feel like they can't stop. They're spending a lot of money on it, things like that. But if you really look under the hood a little bit more, you can figure out that's a farce just by asking this question. Cool. So, how many times has cannabis held a gun to your head and told you have to connect with it? And when they ultimately say never, you can say, okay, well, it's definitely not cannabis's fault then. So what's going on here, right? Well, if we look at cause and effect, is cannabis dependency the cause, right? Is cannabis addiction the cause? No, it's the result. It's the effect of something deeper. So it begs the question, what is the cause? Well, you already alluded to it, right? If you don't think, everyone listening, that we are being affected on an unconscious level by how fucking ridiculous this world is, land pirates trying to take our money, lizard beings controlling the whole thing, right? Like if you don't think, like, as much as we can laugh about it, like we're all being affected by it on some level, right? Not to mention the fact that then we have our own challenges in life and, limiting beliefs and things of that nature. So all of that amalgamates together to create trauma, right? To create challenges within. And because we've never been taught we can heal it ourselves, we look to the external world. And luckily, some people find cannabis instead of opiates or cocaine or alcohol, So at the end of the day, if you're feeling as though you're addicted to cannabis, one of the things that I love to do, and I do this with all my students, is for the next week, don't try to stop, don't try to cut back at all. The only thing you're going to do differently is before every time you connect, and you have to be honest with yourself to make this work, you're going to be honest with yourself and ask yourself why. Why am I choosing to use this plant right now? And what you will notice over a week is that there's going to be a common theme. Maybe it's that you don't feel empowered in your romantic relationship. Maybe it's that your job sucks. Maybe it's that your parents are weighing you down. Whatever it is, you're going to see a theme start to emerge. And then what you do with that theme is you go 6 levels deeper, right? So let's say you find that your romantic relationship, you don't feel free in your romantic relationship. Let's just say that's an example. Well, if you notice that after the first week, now you take that and you go, why? Well, because I don't feel like I can speak my mind. Why? Well, because when I was a kid, my parents told me that good kids were seen, not heard. Why? Because they were traumatized. Why? Because their parents were traumatized. And after you get down to like 7 levels of why, you're going to have a really clear understanding of what the hell's going on. Then the next time you connect with cannabis, make that in your intention to go into and allow yourself to just lay there and allow the body to process what it needs to process while the mind is kind of in safe mode. So that's a lot of what I see now compared to what I used to see back in the day when I was working at the dispensary.
You can tell that you had a psych major. I mean, the ability for you to understand awareness, and that's again, this is why the deeper conversation of the self healing journey is a psychology conversation. I think the psychosomatics that we do not look at in medicine is the problem, right? And that's why like they don't prescribe therapy for cancer, which why when we talk about like the cannabis can support cancer, this is what I've been saying before too, is actually it's an emotional and a psychology of our mind that causes the physical representation of our body. We talk about this in TCM where when you have an emotion, it actually is stored in your organs. Certain organs store different emotions. So while you would have like cancer in the breast or cancer in the genitals, right? We have issues in this country about that, right? About sex. Then you have like cannabis, I mean, a cancer in the lungs, right? It talks about a lot of grief. We don't know how to process grief, and so this whole psychosomatic experience, actually, why cannabis works so well, it is linking you to all these aspects of your body to allow them to come out. I feel like how you were saying it's an amplification. It's like a super awareness tool, right? Because
Mm,
I've always been self-reflective, but when I'm on cannabis, the amount of self-reflection is like you said, it's 6 levels. And so I can understand why this, and suddenly you're like, okay, I know exactly why this happened. Where maybe if you weren't and you were sober, the anxiety would stop you from going further. And this is
mm,
where a lot of times, because a lot of us didn't have anxiety protocols like breathing, like exercise, like all these, we get stuck in our anxiety. And this is why, like, the opiates became a huge thing because one of the ways to deal with anxiety is to turn off the alarm of anxiety. And this is why the same thing that happens with cannabis. People are like, oh, I'm anxious, turn it off, right? And so you focus too much on turning it off. One of the things that I promised myself when I started cannabis is I would actually use this typical classical conditioning. How I
mm,
feel on cannabis is how I want to feel sober. And until
mhm,
the day that I don't need cannabis to feel like I'm high is a day that I don't need cannabis. And so,
mhm,
it's much more recently that I've been able to pull that off. But, for the last 10 years, I've really actually been practicing how to live as if, being high was the sober state, right? And it's so funny that sometimes you see people who are actually really happy-go-lucky people, and you're like, you're like high. Why are you saying that people who are happy are high? And so it made me realize my own reflection that actually cannabis was allowing us to reach the spiritual, the emotional healing that we weren't able to go through because no one was supporting that. No one was talking about going to therapy and talking about it. And even some places in therapy, like let's be real, like not all therapists are really good. Like some of them are already controlled, programming going to through the schools to just follow what the book said, right? But like
mm,
the everyday life, the everyday person, like they're going and doing cannabis. And so when they come to you and you have not experienced cannabis, you're not a good therapist, right? And that's the problem with today's therapists. They're book therapists. They haven't experienced life enough to know how to like have the deeper conversation of the emotion connection, of the spiritual connection that cannabis is really the gateway to, right? And
mm,
so why like we see so much cannabis being done in the spiritual circles, which is great. But then this is where like some of us have to kind of call out the spiritual people and go, hey, ground that shit out. You can't just keep
yeah.
going into your fucking meditation and then not deal with the trauma that I see you get triggered right now. Yeah, and you're like, I'm gonna go smoke weed. No, don't smoke weed right now. You need to go and figure out what is this trigger, right? And so this is where like your ability to actually give classes to teach how to use cannabis is like a manual. We're finally getting manuals. Everyone is finally like writing down these processes because, this was actually, these old books that we had of the ancient tradition of Tibetans or Chinese medicine, like they probably talked about cannabis, but for us during the Reformation of the Communist Party, they threw that away. So we are the new scientists. Like I am the Asian scientists who are testing out cannabis again because it was taken out from us. And not just that, let's be real, like cannabis is done in Asia, like but no one talks about it because only gangsters do it, right?
Mm,
So this is again this like the propaganda is so deep, and it's because when we think about the what I call the government governing the mental, right, is
mm,
what they are written for, is to program you into governing your mentality. But yet, when we do cannabis, this is what I was saying is you go into your heart space. And at that point, it's you and you alone that feels that emotion. And so we are so hungry for feeling ourselves that we are getting stuck now on just the journey of what cannabis does, but we're not taking cannabis seriously. And I think that's a deeper conversation that we both are trying to have is like, hey, don't say cannabis is like for like potheads who do nothing. Like, no, actually, those who use it correctly have learned how to use it in a way that is productive to their spiritual growth, right? And so, in this understanding how to also turn it off when we need to, because a lot of times people think like any medicine, you don't take the medicine all your life. That means you are broken all the way through. The
Mm,
medicine is supposed to kick in when you are having a really tough time. And so, just like Ryan's been really sharing, is how do we actually use this as a medicine because you are whole already. But too many people, too much of our government, too much of the old construct, I call it Stockholm syndrome, that the programming is so deep that we're already living and born in Stockholm syndrome. And so for us to really recognize that, like you said, we have to go through these multiple levels of breaking our conditioning and there are multiple layers, right? Because everything really goes back to our parents and the way they were told to raise us, right? And so today, a lot of us are really like going against like how our parents raised us, but then like using this plant to kind of go to that next level. So I really appreciate, and y'all like this is why we actually have like doctors like me who actually focus and learn how to manage marijuana addiction because we want to use it but not get addicted to it. So there are protocols to allow us not to get addicted, and it's important to rebalance it because sometimes when you are smoking weed, your lungs dry out. So you need to actually take. So actually, I use
mm.
mullein a lot
Yeah,
because it
totally.
brings back your health of your lungs, right? So just like anything, you have to balance your body so that you're not getting all the major effects of any medicine. So that's why I love kind of, for you to share that, like, again, not everybody can handle the addiction, but like, let's work together to break that cycle together because we want you to be whole. It's not like, we're afraid of cannabis and we're not going to use it. No, actually, in any practice, I mean, you could say shadow work could be an addiction. You're like, hey, I can't talk to you right now. No, because I'm going to do shadow work. Like, but like you do shadow work so much, you don't hang out with anyone anymore, right? And that's what happens to a lot of us spiritual people who think shadow work is it. And talking to people is like, oh, your energy is too much for me and I can't handle it. Well, if you can't be in the world, you're really gonna get anxiety again, right? And so, ironically, in doing shadow work, if you're anxious to be around other people, you actually aren't going deep enough to realize that all of us are God reincarnated and we are finding the gods within each of us, right? And so that's why I love kind of where this plant is. I would like for us to, as we kind of start wrapping up, if you'd like to share just I know it might be tough for cannabis, but like one tip for anyone who's listening in their own self-healing journey, whether it's cannabis or whatever, any psychological tip, but what would you like to share for our audience that would really help them in supporting and cheering them on in their own self-healing journey?
Yeah, this is a great question, man. I am going to break your rule. I'm going to do a couple, but they're going to be quick, I promise, right? So, just depending on what kind of person is listening to the podcast, there may be someone who's never tried cannabis, there may be someone who currently feels addicted, right? So, I'll drop a couple. So, if you're brand new to cannabis, right, one of the best things you can do is if you're interested by this conversation to try something out, don't feel like you have to go to a dispensary and get 30% plus THC. Try a hemp product first that has a negligible amount of delta 9 THC, aka you won't get high from it, but you will get the psychoactivity. I find for a lot of people that's all they need, right? You can get hemp gummies. I do recommend always sourcing organic. There's a great place I like, Simply Soul Farms. They have great hemp flour. If you're looking for CBD products, the Alchempist is really good for that. And again, these things are not going to get you high. So for any of you guys that may be like, oh, well, I'd like this, but I don't want to get high. Great. Try these out. Now, for someone who's currently feeling addicted to the plant and trying to figure out what to do, try to figure out, like I said before, the why behind it. You're not just addicted to cannabis. Cannabis is your binky in a way, right? So you have to figure out what you were trying to console yourself for that is actually causing you to need the binky. Otherwise, you're just going to trade one binky for another, right? Cannabis addiction to gym addiction, cannabis addiction to alcohol, whatever it is. And for me, that's just going around to different strategies to survive life rather than actually thrive in life. So really get clear on that why, really get clear on what the why is to why you're going to this medicine. Now, maybe someone listening to this show is someone who's a seasoned user. They don't feel addicted to it whatsoever. And they're actually like, you know what? Like, I hear Ryan and Charlie talking about this plant being psychedelic, but I don't really remember it ever being psychedelic for me. Well, I'm glad you asked. There's a couple of things you can do to increase the psychedelic effects of cannabis. So, what I will say here, caveat, this definitely works. So, do not do this without putting a lot of thought into it. Don't do it for your first time and never drive with it. But, don't do it for your first time when you're going to be hanging around a lot of people or things like that. Like, be aware of what I'm about to say definitely works. So there's 4 different things you can do to increase the psychedelic effects of cannabis. Eat mango 20 minutes before you ingest cannabis. That's going to increase the blood-brain permeability of delta-9 THC to cross that blood-brain barrier. Translation, more effect from less product. Number 2 is dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is high in one of our endocannabinoids called anandamide. And ananda comes from the Sanskrit word bliss. So anyone who's had a runner's high or like a really good high after working out, that's anandamide at work. And so if you eat dark chocolate and potentiate your experience of more anandamide before you connect with the plant, you're going to have a more blissful experience. The third thing is to get a CBN tincture or CBN pills, capsules, things like that. CBN is degraded THC, but it potentiates the THC's ability to work within your system. The fourth and final thing, and this is going to come with its own caveat, is breath work. Now, what I will say is that cannabis is a sympathetic nervous system agonist on onset. So if you're someone who's already experiencing anxiety or paranoia around like, oh my God, my heart's beating so fast or whatever, I would not do any breath work except a down regulatory style. Actually, for people like that, I would highly recommend trying a down regulatory box breath or alternative nostril breathing, because that's a brake pedal to your nervous system. And again, the endocannabinoid system controls the nervous system. And so if you're able to put a brake pedal on that, that's a great way to slow yourself down and stop that tachycardia and things like that. For those listening that want to send it, you can do a little bit different of a breath work, like a Wim Hof, or I wouldn't really go holotropic. It's a little too intense. Again, you're free, you got free will, you can try whatever you want, but breath work will really increase the psychedelic effects of cannabis because cannabis produces melatonin in the brain, and melatonin acts as a precursor to our endogenous DMT, aka the endohuasca we create when we breathe. So anyone who's done breath work knows that in a completely sober state, it can be very psychedelic. But when you have more precursor on hand from which to potentiate the experience, it can get much more profound. Now, because I said that, I have to throw this in too. If you go out too far with cannabis, right? Maybe you're a new user, maybe you try the psychedelic thing, you're like, oh, damn, Ryan was right. This really works. I'm out way too far. CBD will bring you back down, right? Just pure CBD. Chewing on black pepper kernels because they have beta caryophyllene, which is it completely negates the effects of delta-9 THC. And then I already mentioned this, but down regulatory breathing. So now you know what to do if you're a new user, if you're a seasoned user feeling like you're addicted, if you're a seasoned user wanting to experience more of the psychedelic side, and if you're any one of those that ends up going too far. Those would be my tips.
Wow, thank you. Yo, so if you didn't just listen to Ryan give you all this data, this is why, like, again, if you really go into cannabis, you realize there's so much data that is for the positive. Because, like, would you really, like, this is not a pothead talking. Like, you guys seen the propaganda, and this is definitely someone who is very aware of the medical aspect of it, because that's really the conversation we are having, right? It's like, how do we medicalize so we are using it in a really beautiful medicinal way. So
Mhm.
again, thank you, Ryan, for joining us. Thank you for sharing this really deep conversation with me. Plus, like, I've always wanted to be able to share this publicly with my own audience, because as a doctor, like, not everybody would, see that as like, if you're a doctor, why are you doing cannabis? Like, actually, you don't understand the medicinal properties behind it. And so it's
Mhm.
understanding how we can actually moderate it in a way that helps us, right? Rather than us again going back to our binky. So wholeheartedly agree with you. I love you, Ryan. I think you're an amazing
Love you too, bro.
guy helping with the cannabis, evolution. So thank you all for joining us. Oh, one last thing, let everyone know, because I know you have a podcast, so let everyone know
Oh,
where
yeah,
they
yeah.
can find you.
Yeah. So the two best places, one is Instagram at the real Ryan Sprague. If you guys haven't noticed, I love to talk. So reach out with any questions you have, any curiosities, things like that. Happy to offer you any support you may need. You can also go to the website, highlyoptimized.me. I have a free training there on how to break your addiction to cannabis in 30 days without having to quit. And then the podcast, like you mentioned, is the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast. And you can find it on Spotify, Apple. You've been on twice, Charlie. I think your second episode's coming out in a few weeks. But definitely check out Charlie's episode. It's one of my favorites I've done recently on the show. But we've had a bunch of different people on there. Paul Check's been on there. We've had Hamilton Souther on like probably 3 times. I mean, just amazing, amazing people. And really what we do on there is not just talk about the experiences, but more about what people have been able to do as a result of integrating them and working with these medicines in a conscious fashion, so that you can see that it's not just one type of person that can make these medicines really conscious in their life. You're going to see different age ranges, different genders, different ethnicities, different, professional backgrounds. I mean, I really want to show that there is no stigma around this. Like every single type of person utilizes psychedelics. And if someone is a lazy person, they're already lazy, right? Like none of these medicines are going to make them lazier, right? It's not about that. It's just these medicines illuminate who and what you truly are. And most people don't have the awareness to take accountability on that. And they want to offload the guilt onto whatever the external thing is. But that just keeps you in a state of surviving, So really, when we start to be conscious with this medicine, we can allow ourselves to forgive ourselves for the things the medicine shows us, the ways we've been essentially cock blocking ourselves in life from realizing our own power and being able to light up the world with our unique magic that only we have. Our unique fingerprints will never walk the planet again. It's time for us to really sit into, why am I here? And what can I leave this world with to allow generations to come to benefit from the Garden of Earth being greener than when we found it? So really excited that I got to come through, Charlie. Excited to do it again and again and again. And I hope everyone listening benefited from it. And I'm really excited to connect with all of you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ryan. You all have a great one. Okay. Bye.
Peace.